Good
Oh,
evening, Graham, and good evening to Jamie. This
good
is the
evening.
voice of Charles, and welcome, Jamie. That is the voice of Jamie Taylor, author. Third voice is Graham Chalmers. Good evening, Graham. How are you?
I'm totally fine. Been writing my book this weekend, so I'm a bit
Getting
mentally
competitive
knackered.
with Jamie, you see. Yeah. Well, welcome, Jamie. We are delighted to have you on board for this evening. And the reason that you're with us is the book from Sheffield, Studio Electrophonique, the Sheffield Space Age, from the Human League to Pulp, brackets the British Pop Archive. Graham, would you like to introduce our guest and maybe ask the first question as well?
Yeah, well, my questions tend to be statements with a little bit of discussion, so I do apologise. But I know it's
Yes.
published by Manchester United Press, and I've got it, and I've read most of it as well. And
Mm.
it's a fantastic book because it's not the world's biggest book, but every line counts, and it's like a cross between straight history, beautifully written prose, first person oral history, and then it's studied together a bit like a novel. So it's just a fantastic book.
So,
It's very generous words, Graham. There, thanks for that.
Jamie, would you introduce the book to us? I know that's lazy, but I think, given you are the author, I think that would be most helpful for you to do an introduction to the book and then maybe also say what drew you to writing about this particular subject.
Of course, yeah. So, firstly, apologies for the unwieldy title that everybody
It'll
struggles
never
with. It.
work. It'll never catch on, Jamie.
No, no. Well, that was the main thing that I was wrangling with my publisher about because I wanted it to have a very short, obscure title, but they said it's never going to sell unless it's got the names of different bands in it.
Yeah.
So I was just going to call it Memories of the Sheffield Space Age,
Yeah.
but they wouldn't have it. But anyway, so the sort
It's a
of
good name though. The name is really good. I like it.
well, thanks. But yeah, for your question, Charles, about where it came from, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a personal story, really. I think, like Graham was saying in the book, there's a first person element to it because obviously I'm from Sheffield and my dad grew up around the corner from Ken Patton's studio,
Yes.
which he christened Studio Electrophonique,
Mm.
and it was really this. It was based on a documentary that me and my friend James made a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
He's a musician and he's from that area, and he records under the name Studio Electrophonique. So together we made this film, just trying to dig into this story, which was a really untold story, even in Sheffield. So lots of our friends in Sheffield who were into music hadn't really heard of Ken, and
Mm.
lots of the bands who went there as youngsters and went on to become quite famous hadn't really been asked about it or talked about it before. So we found that it was quite an interesting subject to dig into, and then obviously I then had the chance to turn it into a book, which I seized upon. So yeah, that's where it came from.
I mean,
Excellent.
Graham, go
What I
on.
like about Ken Patton is that he's a bit of a sort of Heath Robinson type character.
Yeah.
You know, a mechanic, but he's actually like the North's Joe Meek. He's really important.
Yeah, yeah, and it's such a great character as well. And that was a common thread in our investigation. Everyone who we spoke to who'd been to Ken's house remembered him really fondly. Like he was a really nice guy. He was very supportive. He was very non-judgmental. He was very cheap. So he wasn't trying to rip
Essential.
them off.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what looked like a normal council house in Sheffield, it sort of housed this. And I keep every time I'm interviewed about the book, it reminds me of someone out of. It's either someone like the guy out of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang or
Mm.
like a Wes Anderson style like eccentric who,
Mm,
like
mm.
you said, Graham, just sort of cobbled together all this gear out of. I made most of it himself, and he made half of it from stuff that he'd nicked from the RAF in the Second World War.
Brilliant.
So yeah, just like a really eccentric fictional character, but who was actually real.
So
Yeah,
what drew him to music then?
I think he was always into music. So he was in the RAF in the Second World War, and he used to play in the RAF band, and he played
Ah.
played the banjo.
Mm.
And then when he came back from the war, he started playing the. I think he bought a guitar for his wife, but his wife didn't wasn't interested, so he taught himself the guitar, and then he became part of this wave of sort of tape recorder enthusiasts who, because when tape recorders became a bit cheaper, lots of people started recording music or even sort of going out to a church fete and recording the Morris dancers or whatever. So there was like a network of people who used to exchange tape recordings, and he got into that and started making his own science fiction sort of radio sketches. And he was just a very creative person who was always sort of looking to the future and trying to push the boundaries of what he could do with his homemade recording gear, really.
Did he have a day job?
Yeah, he was a panel beater. So he had a garage.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He had a garage. He had a garage in one of the arches under North.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
In Sheffield city centre. So he worked there from the 1950s until he died in 1990. I think he only just retired before he died. He died when he was quite young. I think he was only 65. So his whole working life, he was working by day, knocking the dents out of cars, and then in the evenings and at the weekends, he sort of retreated to his studio and made all these magical recordings.
Does he have a
The book is good on giving you a little glimpse into like the beginnings of Human League and Cabaret Voltaire and ABC and Jarvis Cocker. But it's more than that, partly because you use a lot of oral history and quite a few quotes from the brilliant Martin Ware. It really gets across Sheffield's character, and it's a very Sheffield book. It feels like it's a Sheffield book.
I think so. I mean, I was sort of concerned when I was writing it because I'm from Sheffield and I was alive during this time, but I was only a young kid, so I wasn't there at Ken's house, and I wasn't there when Cabaret Voltaire and the early Human League were knocking around in Sheffield. So I did feel like I was relying on their stories and trying to conjure up an atmosphere that did exist, and that was my main relief when because those people who were in the book have fed back to me that it was sort of acceptable, and I done I saw Mal from Cabaret Voltaire this week a couple of times, and he was complimentary. So if they're happy with it, then I'm happy with it, and hopefully it's sort of summed up what it was like in Sheffield. But I think it was from those people, the attitude of Sheffield you referred to, Graham. I think it does, even though they were much younger than Ken. I think they had a similar attitude in that they weren't waiting to be asked to make something creative. They were just getting on with it, and they didn't really care if they didn't have any musical education or they didn't have a record deal. They just sort of cobbled together whatever synthesizers they could get through the post and picked up any kind of instruments that they could get hold of and just got on with it. Really, they didn't really wait for permission or follow any prevailing trends. They just did what they wanted, which I think is quite a Sheffield thing to this day. I think there's sort of a DIY attitude that people just get on with it and don't really shout about it.
I mean, you can think of Sheffield as being made in Sheffield as a very significant rubber stamp of Sheffield and steel. And it might be, and this might be a contrived image, but if one thinks of music with a cutting edge, and you'll see where I'm going with this, the idea of the blade, etc. Is that part of it? I mean, it's a superior music city to Leeds, arguably. I think not even probably arguably. I just wonder what it is, the characteristics of something like this. Interesting, this idea of DIY, but also, as I suggest, maybe at the cutting edge, which certainly you would have to say early Human League, you'd have to say Cabaret Voltaire. You could see that.
Definitely, yeah. I think especially, I wanted to get Cabaret Voltaire in there, even though they never went to Ken's. I think by the time they were getting ready to make their first stuff, they had their own studio at Western Works, which was in Sheffield City Centre, but they had a very similar attitude, and Cabaret Voltaire especially were miles ahead of their time.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, I think they started making music in Chris Watson's loft in 1973, and it was very confrontational, avant-garde, electronica, and sort of with a punk attitude 2 or 3 years before punk sort of hit the UK. So definitely cutting edge in terms of being ahead of their time in terms of cheap synthesizers and electronic sounds, but also cutting edge in terms of like the confrontational, uncompromising attitude. Because I mean, lots of Cabaret Voltaire's songs were sort of politically extreme or quite unfiltered, and I think a lot of the recordings by the Future, which are the Future, were Martin Ware and Ian Craig Marsh, who obviously went on to form the Human League, plus Addie Newton, who formed Clock DVA, and the recordings they made with Ken in this suburban council house in 1977 were very extreme. Sort of, I think one of them was about the Son of Sam murders in New York in 1977, and it was like bizarre electronic soundscapes with police sirens and wild screams over the top of it. So yeah, really, it wasn't going to get in the top 10. Put it that way.
Graham,
I actually went to Sheffield to college in '85 and '86 and stayed there for a while, and saw G's Chain there when Bobby Gillespie on snare drum. And I noticed even then that as a Scotsman in Yorkshire, that Sheffield is different to other parts of Yorkshire. It's got a different character. So when all these Sheffield bands were coming out using synthesizers in the late 70s, Leeds was also doing DIY stuff, but Leeds was coming up with scratchy post-punk bands like Gang of Four, the Mekons, Delta 5. They weren't buying Korg 700S synthesizers like they were in Sheffield. And it led to like interesting music in Leeds, but completely different to Sheffield, because Sheffield people are different to Leeds people.
Yeah, I agree. I think, well, Soft Cell, I suppose, came out of Leeds, didn't they? And they were quite synthy. But I think from speaking to the people who were in those bands in Sheffield, a lot of their influences were not musical influences. So that like Dada art was like a real influence for some reason, and also things like film. So they were all obsessed with A Clockwork Orange and early John Carpenter synthesizers. Like films like
Escape from New York.
Escape from New York.
Assault Precinct 13.
That's the one. And things like Rollerball, even, which are quite. Rollerball is often like overlooked because it's quite I don't know. I suppose it's more of a gimmicky film, but I think
quite a strange film, though.
Yeah, I think it came out in 1976, but they were really the bands in Sheffield were really obsessed with that, and I think the Human League painted their studio orange in response to Rollerball. But yeah, they were into films like that, which obviously a few of them had quite heavy, primitive synthesizer soundtracks. Especially Clockwork Orange was very influential. But also another common thing was the first Roxy Music album, which they were all obsessed with, and Brian Eno. So yeah, they drew their influences from quite non-musical sources sometimes.
I know that Thatcher did affect pop and culture, and I noticed this when I went to the Hull City of Culture in 2017, and I went to the Coombe exhibition with a lot of early Throbbing Gristle stuff, and it showed that the roots of Throbbing Gristle were in the sort of like avant-garde arts happening on the streets of Hull in 71, in 72 and 73. And so it made me think that people like Martin Ware and Phil Oakey and Richard H. Kirk, they were growing up at a time when being avant-garde, when they were younger before they formed a band, was totally normal. You had agitprop theatre on the stage. You had BBC having Play for Today every week. Everything was getting more liberal. Comprehensive schools were good. Dole money was good. It was just the right time for interesting characters to do things.
Yeah, and I think similarly in Sheffield, I mentioned this in the book. Sheffield had a famously sort of extreme left-wing council. It was the People's Republic of South Yorkshire in the late 70s, and under David Blunkett. But before that, even in the early 70s, one of the main reasons why all these young people turned to a life in art was this Sheffield City Council arts project called Meat Whistle. She's got a very bizarre title. I don't think you'd get away with that today, but
it's good name for a 70s band.
Yeah. So these two people, it was Chris and Veronica Wilkinson he was an actor and a playwright. She worked in drama as well, and they were given this money by Sheffield City Council to basically go to all the comprehensive schools in Sheffield and say, we're putting on this arts project in town at the weekend. If anyone fancies it, come along. And this was like 1973, and the people who went to that were people like Glenn Gregory, Martin Ware, Paul Bauer, who formed a Sheffield punk band called 2.3, and he did the first Sheffield punk fanzine, which was called Gun Rubber. Addy Newton from Clock DVA went to meet Whistle, but also people who went on to have a life in art who weren't in music. So Ian Reddington, who was an actor who was in EastEnders and things like that. So basically, all these kids from working class backgrounds, from comprehensive schools, were given this chance to kind of go, and it was all paid for. So that when they turned up to this project, they had tape recorders, musical instruments, even early video cameras, I think. So they were just given the freedom to mess about and create things. And obviously they found kindred spirits there, and that's where these friendships started that led to these groups, really. So it was very sort of civic funded.
Yeah.
Along with things like the library, like the Sheffield Central Library. People talk about that because it had a great record library where you could go and borrow some like avant-garde music concrete, like an album you'd never be able to afford to buy it and take a risk on it because it probably sounded shit. But like you could go and borrow it for free and listen to it and impress your friends by telling them you've been listening to, I don't know, John Cage or something like that. But yeah, so the library was the record library downstairs, and then upstairs there was an art gallery where you could go and hang about and look at the Andy Warhol paintings. So it was really, they were all quite self-educated in terms of culture, but the provision was there for them from the city as well. Which,
Jamie, it would strike me that would seem to me to be a contrast with 2025.
Yeah, that's what
I was in Sheffield at the journalism college. I remember going around Sheffield for 10 pence on bus journeys, which is an extraordinary time. And yet it was a city in industrial decline, the steel industry already at that time. Yet all this creativity was being funded and the opportunities were being given to people. Just wonder what it's like now in Sheffield by way of contrast with that. I know that's not directly in the book, but I'd just be interested to hear what your thoughts are on that.
I think Sheffield is still quite a cultural city, and that there are lots of cultural things going on there. And I think that the government funding is not there anymore.
No,
but I think in Sheffield certainly there's a culture of filmmaking, music making, and lots of art spaces. I think one of the things they said in the 70s was, in a way, the industrial decline was helpful because all these workshops that used to be used by sort of master cutlers were abandoned.
Yeah.
So lots of the bands and artists moved into these workshops free of charge or very low rent, and that's where they started making their music. So in a way that gave them a start. And I think now there are similar spaces to that still in Sheffield. So lots of new things that are still popping up in old abandoned factories, or lots of communal cultural areas that spring up. I mean, I bet it's the same in many northern cities, Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool. Lots of spaces that were industrial that are now used for, like food markets or antiques fairs or, independent record shops, bookshops. So I think it is still an area where people will find a way to get independent art out there.
Graham?
I met Martin Ware once to interview him when he was talking about doing a sound installation in an old Wesley Chapel in Harrogate. And he was saying to me that Phil Oakey was a great guy. He was made to be a front man. He was really likable. But if he hadn't been in a group, he was completely useless at life, and he would never have got anywhere.
I don't. Well, I've tried my best to get in touch with Phil Oakey for the book. I think he's very reticent in terms of contributing to these sort of what you might see as nostalgic books or accounts. But he was very nice because I know where he lives. I tried to tempt him out of his house I kept sending him these J.G. Ballard postcards because that was the other thing. Another massive influence on all these bands where they're all into science, like pulp science fiction, especially like J.G. Ballard and Michael Moorcock. And Phil Oakey used to work in the science fiction section of the university bookshop in the Arts Tower. So I thought if I wrote him some nicely worded J.G. Ballard postcards, he'd come out. But he did get in touch with me and said he wished me luck and said, but I'm not going to get involved, which was fair enough. But yeah, he's still in Sheffield, and he's still touring with the Human League, this Human League Mark II. But yeah, I think he is a nice guy, but I just think I think he feels that whatever he says, someone will it'll cause aggravation, so he just doesn't bother, I don't think.
Yeah, there's a lot of history with the band members over the years, so he doesn't want to delve into those sort of waters, really.
No.
Jarvis
Great
Cocker.
thing about them.
Graham, Jarvis, I was going to ask just about Jarvis Cocker, obviously
Yeah.
frontman who is right back now, Jamie, in the public eye because of the new album by Pulp that's coming out, the album entitled More. How did you find? Well, you did interview Jarvis. How easy was that to get Rubber Stamp to do that?
I didn't interview him personally. So when we made the film, we one of the producers who was making the film knows Jarvis and conducted that interview. So he's he's a really integral part of the film and the book because obviously he went to Ken's house when he was still at school, and that Pulp tape they recorded at Ken's in 1981 that got them a John Peel session. He was someone who they thought they'd hit the big time when they were still at school. But then Jarvis obviously came back down to earth, and he had to live in Sheffield for another sort of 12 years before they actually hit the big time. So he put a real shift in Sheffield when it was in decline, and I've got real admiration for Jarvis because they were quite difficult times in Sheffield, and he was living through the kind of artistic bohemian struggle of living in an old abandoned factory with his mate who was the caretaker and sort of falling out of a window and breaking his pelvis and just sort of scrabbling along trying to keep this band going. And I think I said this before in an interview last week, but even years later, I mean, he doesn't live in Sheffield now, but whenever he remembers something from Sheffield or makes a comment about Sheffield, it's always spot on in terms of the sort of character of Sheffield and the things that he recalls, because he did put a shift in the struggling in Sheffield when it was tough. Yeah.
Well,
I know that Kraftwerk were a big influence in anything interesting going on in the mid to late 70s in Britain, but also Can. I know that krautrock's huge now, but it wasn't till about 15 years ago. But Can were hugely important and fed into bands like Cabaret Voltaire and Human League. And if you listen to like Human League and Cabaret Voltaire at the beginning, they sound like Blade Runner, which hadn't even been made at that point. It's got the same sort of aesthetic, and even some of the same sounds as the soundtrack of Blade Runner.
Yeah, well, the other band that was mentioned quite a lot is because, like I was saying, when Martin Ware and Phil Oakey were getting the first Human League recordings going with Ian Craig Marsh, they were really into science fiction, but they were also really they were both sort of prog enthusiasts. So they were, even though that wasn't very fashionable, they were into things like Tangerine Dream.
Oh, I saw them all the week in Manchester.
Yeah, so I think they were, and again, they weren't really bothered that it wasn't that fashionable, but they were. And I think Cabaret Voltaire, they talked about going to see Can, and even things like Gong and stuff, stuff that wasn't very fashionable, but they had an element of sort of electronic music or science fiction style sound effects. So there's definitely this, and again, this is partly why I called it the Sheffield Space Age, because all these young artists plus Ken, they had this an obsession that I suppose was shared around the world in the 60s and 70s about, people were landing on the moon, people were going to space. Lots of TV and film was all about space travel and the future. So I think anything that had this kind of futuristic sheen to it was really attractive, and that's what they were looking towards. And I suppose in a way it was a sort of fantasy escape from Sheffield, which was not very futuristic. I suppose it had quite futuristic, brutalist flats, but that was about it.
Yeah. I lived in one of those. The last quote on that I have here talks about unfounded yet undaunted self-belief, and I like that thought. That is important, self-belief, because it's against the odds, if you like. I mean, it's a city that's in decline. We've said that, and to do anything creative takes a lot of self-belief, takes a lot of guts. An interesting, choice of word there, self-belief.
Yeah, I think, and that's the main thing that sort of drove me to write this book. It was because I wasn't there at the time, but when I hear the stories and when I read about what was going on in those days, I'm in awe really of the courage that they had. Because I would imagine all these young kids were sort of routinely ignored in their jobs or in their day-to-day life, but then they had the guts at the weekend to get in a workshop and come up with something like being boiled or, nag, nag, nag. And a good example, I think, is when Martin Ware and Ian Craig Marsh said to Phil, "Do you want to be our singer? Here's a tape." They gave him a cassette with the backing to Being Boiled on it.
Yeah.
And a day later, he came back and he had the courage to just sing the melody and the lyrics, which is so bizarre but amazing. Just to stand up in front of your mates and come out with something like that is just that kind of thing. That's the kind of creative courage that I find amazing, really.
Absolutely. Graham?
Well, I think we're coming fairly much towards the end, but is this the first time that Ken Patton, in all his great work in his home studio in Sheffield, has actually been publicly recognised?
I think in a long form like this, I found out about him. There's a book, a great book by Martin Lilliker, who's sadly no longer with us, but he wrote a book called Beats Working for a Living, which was a locally produced book, which was like an encyclopedia of all the bands that were around in Sheffield in the 70s and early 80s. And in that book, there's a picture of Ken Patton's business card, and there's a short paragraph or page about Ken. So that's where I first spotted it. And because I'd noticed in that book that he was from Ballyfield in Sheffield, which is where my dad was from, that's what attracted my interest. And the fact that on his card, it's got quite a normal northern guy's name, Ken Patton, but it said Ken Patton home recordings at Studio Electrophonique. And I just thought it's such a great name for a Sheffield council.
Does he have a blue plaque, Jamie?
He doesn't. No, he doesn't.
Are you gonna try and get him one?
We have talked about it, but I think the trouble is the house is just a privately owned house now. So
it's still there.
The people who live there, I think we saw it was for sale last year, so somebody must have just bought it.
Yeah.
And I think they'd be a bit shocked if I rocked up there just trying to nail a blue plaque on the house.
Leading a tour around Sheffield's music spots.
Well, we did a tour before. That was successful. And there's another. I'm doing a walking tour on. I don't know when this is coming out, but 15th of June, which is a Sunday afternoon. I'm doing a walking tour organised by the local bookshop in Sheffield City Centre. So that's hopefully going to be get a few people.
What time of the day is that?
I think it's 2:00 in the afternoon on a Sunday afternoon.
Jamie, you're going to turn up at the house then unexpectedly and demand cups of tea?
It's a bit too far to walk from Sheffield City Centre, but we're going to go around the spots of around within striking distance of the city centre.
Yeah, splendid. Graham, closing thought, if you would, and a thank you to Jamie.
It's just a fantastic book. Definitely one of the best music books of the year, and it's great to revive space age optimism. It's such a time of mourning and misery and death and destruction.
Yeah, I agree. And thanks for asking me to do this. I appreciate it, and thanks for being so kind about the book because it is my first book. So I was a bit wary of whether it was going to fall flat or people were going to
Mm-hmm.
say it was
Look,
terrible. So
it's,
thanks for.
as soon as I started reading it, straight away it's great. It's really well written. Great book.
Well, thank you very much.
I've got one last question, Jamie. The choice of book cover, which is green.
Yeah, so I think this. So the Manchester University Press. This is like a series called the British Pop Archive, and I think the designer, the designer is a local artist from Sheffield. Actually, it's called Tom Etherington.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the whole series is designed in these fluorescent inks.
Soft
So
cell is pink. Yeah.
the first one is bright pink, and then mine's bright green. So I don't know what the next one's going to be. I did actually say when they were putting it together, I thought it would be good if it was just to fit in with the brutalist ethos. I was going to ask for it to just be grey or silver.
Silver would have been great. I would have loved
Yeah,
that.
I think
Excellent.
toxic radioactive green is a good.
That's equally good, isn't it? Well, thank you so much, Jamie. We really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for joining us. And do you have a date then of the walk in Sheffield? Just remind us. You said June 15th. Did you say was it June 15th?
Sunday the 15th of June, and it's a bookshop that's called La Biblioteca.
Oh yes, yes.
So I think
Good name.
if you find them online, I think you can book onto it there. It's free.
Such Sheffield names:
Brilliant.
Studio Electrophonique and Biblioteca. Marvelous.
Love it.
Thanks so much. Cheers, then, Jamie. All
Thank
the
you.
best. Bye
Cheers.
now.
Bye.
Cheers. So, Graham,
He
that
was good.
I mean, of course,
It's a great book.
yeah, and it's a period of music that I was there in Sheffield when all that was happening. So, for the year of studying journalism college, and that was when this music scene was developing in the way that it was. But I had no idea about the early space age part of the story, the Ken Patton part of the story. Did not know his story at all. So, so that's fantastic actually to draw attention. And I liked your thought that it's the equivalent of Joe Meek. I mean, that's an obvious comparison to make, but you can see why.
It
So,
should be a
Graham,
film, a
yeah.
Ken Patton film.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Graham, I think you'd like to draw attention to a couple of things
Yeah.
at Bradford City of Culture, if you would.
Yeah, Bradford City Culture's finally got going. Good things are happening. I mean, this is
Yeah.
not the best thing that's happened, but first of all, the King and Queen did turn up at Bradford last week
Yes,
because
they
of City
did.
Culture. And they
Yeah.
did go to Alhambra and went to the area of Bradford Live, and it's
Mm.
a real arts area there now. So that was good. Then on top of that, you've got a new film season at Pictureville in the National Science and Media Museum in Bradford called Northern Youth, all films about Northern youth culture, which is great. It's a great selection of films like The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner,
Mhm.
Long Day Closes, My Summer of Love, Control, How to Have Sex, This is England. There's only one slight problem with this strand of films at Pictureville and Bradford. It
Yeah.
hasn't got Billy Liar, the quintessential Bradford film about
Why have
young
they not
people.
got Billy Lai?
I do not know. I don't know. Anyway, let's not be negative because there's more good news. Guess what's just been happening this weekend in Bradford and the surrounding area?
Pass. No idea.
The Bradford Progress, 36 hours of lots of different types of music across lots of different locations and venues around Bradford.
Mm.
Unusual venues, public venues, in the street, in the hills, everywhere. And it's been organised by composer and conductor Charles Hazelwood and also concept artist Jeremy Deller, who are two big names
Yes. Yes,
in
indeed.
progressive culture.
Mm.
And obviously, Hazelwood's the guy that I've seen doing Steve Reich before. He's worked with
Yeah.
Goldfrapp and
Yeah.
Portishead. I saw him do Tubular Bells on stage, the Mike Oldfield 70s album. And Jeremy Deller, really interesting.
Mm.
His film he made a long time ago about the links between the miners' strike and Thatcher and rave culture music of
Yeah.
the 1980s was sensational.
Mm.
And so that's been happening for 36 hours straight. And it's been a sequence from place to place across Bradford and Ilkley and beyond. And it's involved Bhangra, classical, gospel, electronic,
Mm.
Sufi, punk, choirs, and also Charles Hazelwood's orchestra, the Power Orchestra. So that's a really good thing to happen.
I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing that you want a festival like this to have a celebration of a city, but using myriad places within it, using myriad cultures within it, and also being progressive and futuristic at the same time. That sounds a really good model for an event, actually, at the festival, Graham.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic, except for one slight issue I would have.
Yeah.
But the fact it's part of Bradford City of Culture, Jeremy Dell is from London
Yeah.
and Charles Hazelwood's from Sussex. So, and I know involves lots of local musicians and singers. I mean, they've got the South Asian Women's Choir, which is the first South Asian women's choir in Yorkshire. They're
Mm.
taking part, and there's lots of local involvement. But it would have
I
been,
think it's fine to have to bring together both the local element and people from outside working together. I think it's obviously important to promote the culture from within the city, but equally, I think to have an outside view working on it as well. I think that's fine. I think you want to have that conflation.
yeah. I suppose I'm nitpicking. It is good. So I don't know why I'm complaining.
Well, that ends that complaint. So, Graham, last night was the last night of the last night of the last night of Crap's last tape.
I know.
Exit Gary Oldman, stage left, minus bananas. Having eaten, I haven't actually quite calculated how many bananas, but each show he had to eat 2.5 bananas. And on certain
I mean, never eat another
weekends,
banana again in his life.
well, I would think so. On certain weekends, therefore, when he was doing the matinees, you'd be having to eat 5 bananas. And I hadn't equally looked up quite what the damage potentially with potassium abuse, which is what it must amount to.
Is he taking up tennis now?
Is it what? He's got to do that
Taking
next,
up
isn't he?
tennis.
Well, he's clearly going to have to turn to tennis now, isn't he? But
Mm-mm.
so anyway, it's been and gone, and I mean, in terms of coverage, has been remarkable. The sheer range of who has covered it, from the New York Times to Tatler, just the contrast there of those two.
Mm-mm.
And
Mm.
I would have said that York Theatre Royals probably never had a
No.
reviewing capacity like that. Even when Beric Kaler was becoming to some extent a national figure because of being in pantomime for so long, and there was curiosity that grew beyond York about his being a phenomenon, and it did attract, therefore, attention from elsewhere, including a radio documentary from the BBC. So, but this has been on a wholly different level. This has been as high profile as any arts event I can think of ever that in my time of covering
Yeah.
York.
Well, the great thing about this episode is that we've got York, Bradford, and Sheffield.
Yeah.
As the fall once sang, the North will rise again.
Well, I'm always convinced of this, Graham. How often do we feature London in our podcast?
Well, we feature things that relate to London, but we don't feature London partly because we don't live in London, and partly because
Graham,
these
I can't
days
believe how
you
practical you
don't
come
you
up with
do,
as a reason.
these days you don't have to go to London for good culture.
No.
This isn't like, the 1950s. The culture happens in the north. We're not
I
all in
would say
clocks
that has
anymore.
been one of our strong arguments forever and a day. I mean, I just want to celebrate York today, for example. Today in York, on Arts Barge. Do you know Arts Barge? Do you know what it is?
Is it where you throw paintings off a boat?
It is not what you do, Graham. No, Arts Barge took over. It's taken over a cargo boat,
Mm.
and the Selby Tony from memory, I think it's called.
It's
And
gonna
it's an
end.
art.
Say
It's an
something
art.
nice about it.
Yeah, it's an art. Yeah, it's been made into an arts hub, and for 3 days, it's been going for a while. But for 3 days, we've had an arts festival going on within this boat, and it's just typically now what you would like to see happening in cities, which is an original idea.
As long as they've got a river.
It's on the river. It's on the Foss
Yeah,
Basin.
but not all cities have rivers.
Graham, fine. If they don't have a river, then they're not going to do this, but they would probably find some. My point is they have used the river, which does not get
Mm.
used in York Arts enough. But there they are on the river.
You've been listening to the podcast Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Your hosts were Graham Chalmers and Charles Hutchinson. This was a Baltic sub-production.